Well, ladies and gentlemen, here is a number that should scare the hell out of the Democratic establishment. $16 million. Now, that's roughly how much Alex Vindman raised in his campaign for the Democratic nomination for the U.S. Senate from the state of Florida. He had national name recognition. He had a national donor network. He was a Trump antagonist who Democrats have been promoting for years. And he lost last night, not by 1 point and not because of a recount. He got beat by a lady named Angie Nixon, a very progressive Florida state rep and a Democratic Socialist of America, someone who raised less than $1 million. About $16 million versus less than $1 million. And Nixon won 56-44. So look, forget about the Republican versus Democrat story for a second, because I think the more interesting story just continues to be what happens inside the Democratic Party when the socialists continue to rise. I mean, voters were given a choice. They could choose the nationally known candidate, the guy who constantly attacks President Trump, the military veteran. They could choose the candidate with the enormous financial advantage. They could choose the person who looked great on paper. The establishment's obvious choice. They said no. They chose the insurgent. They chose the communist, the socialist. And look, if you're trying to understand where the Democratic Party is heading, especially before the midterms, you should pay attention to what we're going to talk about here today, because Florida may have just given us another piece of evidence that the Democrats and their establishment has a problem. A problem that they don't know how to solve, and it's with its own voters. Now, look, I want to be precise about what I'm trying to tell you, okay? America hasn't suddenly moved to the left. It doesn't even mean Florida has moved to the left. It certainly doesn't mean Angie Nixon is going to win the U.S. Senate in November, okay? She has to face Republican Senator Ashley Moody. And Florida has actually moved significantly towards Republican favor in recent elections. So I'm not going to sit here and predict that Nixon is going to win. That's not the point here. The point is that Democratic voters are doing exactly what they've been doing across the country. They're doing what they do when Democrats are the only people making a decision. They go progressive. I mean, they rejected Vindman. Think about who Vindman is for a second, if you don't know who he is, okay? He's not some anonymous county commissioner who just happened to raise a bunch of money. He became nationally famous during the first Trump administration. He testified during Trump's impeachment. For years, this dude has occupied exactly the kind of political space that the anti-Trump establishment has understood perfectly. Keep saying Trump's a threat. Keep making Trump the story. Trump is the organizing principle. He's the monster. And Vindman was good at it. And it gave him some national recognition. It gave him access to a bunch of donors. Enormous fundraising advantage. But when the actual voters of the Democratic primary in Florida, when they got to the ballot box, they didn't care. Angie Nixon beat him. And look, that's where this just continues to grow, because we have spent years being told that the Democratic politics revolves around defeating Donald Trump. Vindman was almost a tailor-made candidate for that exact ambition. But Democratic primary voters had the opportunity to nominate him for the U.S. Senate. Instead of doing that, they selected a candidate from the communist insurgent wing of the party. That is a signal, folks. It's a bat signal. It's a sickle and hammer. Now, we should be careful, though, about how far we can, exacerbate this or maybe extrapolate the information from this party, but we can't ignore it, okay? The Democratic Party has been wrestling with the same fundamental question for the past few years, and it's gotten even worse this cycle. Who the hell controls this party? Is it the establishment or is it the activist base? And increasingly, those things aren't exactly the same people. The establishment thinks about electability, fundraising, institutional relationships, national networks. beating Donald Trump, impeachment. I mean, Gaza, corporate power. The Democratic establishment may look at a state like Florida and ask that, who's going to give us the best possible chance against Ashley Moody? Now, the activist voter, they asked with the same intent, they asked a completely different question. Who's going to burn it all down? Who hates the establishment? Who represents what I believe, I guess you might think. And again, those questions produce very, very different candidates. Tuesday night, got to see it. Now, look, here's the part that, and I hate saying here's the part, right? But really, this is what we have to take away. We cannot misunderstand the point here. It's easy to laugh at this, okay? It is. Think of it. Democrats nominated a communist, okay? Republicans, we should love that, right? I mean, maybe. But we can't confuse this potentially weaker general election candidate with a weak political movement, because it's not. Okay, it's not the same. If Democratic voters are willing to reject a candidate with massive financial advantage and a national recognition and a brand just because they want some different kind of political energy, that's something we have to pay attention to. We can disagree with the energy. I certainly disagree with a lot of what the socialist wing of the Democratic Party believes, and I'm sure you do too. But dismissing it is stupid, because movements like this become dangerous, especially to an establishment, precisely when voters stop listening to them. That's what Republicans learned from Donald Trump. Remember 2016? How tired were we? How tired were we of the establishment? And the establishment said, look, he can't win. We got told who should be the president. We got told who had the ability to organize. We got told who had the donors. But we looked at that and said, you know what? Take a walk. And we gave them the answer. We don't care. We're choosing Trump. Now, I'm not telling you that Angie Nixon is the Democratic version of Donald Trump. I mean, that's not the case. Look, I'm talking about the political mechanism, okay? Because voters, when they become dissatisfied, okay, with the people running the party, they stop trusting the institutional signals. Money becomes less persuasive. They don't care about endorsements. They don't care about electability. They don't. An insurgent wing of the party and their candidates, they suddenly start winning races they weren't supposed to win. And that's why the fundraising numbers matter so much. If this were two candidates with roughly equal resources and Nixon won 51-49, I don't think we'd have this conversation. But Vindman had an enormous advantage, and he lost by double digits. Didn't have the ability, even with money, to overcome whatever Democratic primary voters were trying to reject here. And Democrats now have to figure out exactly what those voters were rejecting. Was it Vindman? Was it the establishment? Was it his campaign? Was it Gaza? Was it simply that Nixon connected better with the voters? I mean, it's probably some combination of that, but we shouldn't pretend the election, result just gives us the answer on its face, because it doesn't. But it absolutely tells us that their old assumptions just don't work. And there's another irony here. Again, for years, Republicans have been told that Trump-centered politics is somehow uniquely Republican. Everything is Trump. Every election is Trump. Every candidate has to talk about him. And Alex Vindman's entire political identity was forged in opposition to Trump. And voters knew that. And they were given a chance to reward that identity. And they rejected it. And that's what we should notice as well. Because, look, maybe the Democratic base wants something beyond another candidate who's just going to sit around and bitch about President Trump all day and all night. Maybe the voters aren't interested in relitigating 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. Maybe they're just demanding candidates who represent their ideological direction and framework, the way they want the party to move. And if that's happening, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, and the gang, they have a much bigger problem than this Senate primary, because the establishment controls institutions. It can control donor networks, endorsements, it recruits, it builds campaign infrastructure. But ultimately, it's powerless in forcing primary voters, or voters for that matter, to obey. And despite their efforts, those voters just took someone with a roughly 16-1 advantage and made a decision. So now we find out whether this was just an unusual Florida primary or whether it's another warning that the Democratic establishment is losing control of its party, the party it's supposed to lead. And for the Republicans, there's a lesson here too. Don't just watch whether Democrats win or lose. Watch who wins. Watch who the Democrat voters are choosing, because that tells us what kind of Democratic Party that we're actually going to be fighting over the next few years, specifically in November. And right now, the fight inside of the Democratic Party may be every bit as important as the fight that we have between Democrats and Republicans. I love to see it.